I'm going to try and convey some ideas about what next if you're an entrepreneur and you're stuck in some way, whether it's about not sure what to do next with the business and how to get it to grow, not sure with your personal development, maybe as a director. In the flyer, we talked about that transition from manager to director. So I'll be talking quite a lot about that. And then just throwing in a little bit of a flavor of fourth industrial revolution, because as leaders in organizations, we really need to think about it and be aware of what's going on there. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from the UK, came into South Africa in 1992, and I've been with Cerdo Group since 2013. And I've worked on a number of boards over the years, and at the moment I'm serving on 4 boards, all based in South Africa, but I have had experience on boards in Kenya and various other places. But what drives me and why I enjoy doing these webinars and why I enjoy this whole journey of education with directors is because I'm really passionate about this concept that we have quite a few good directors, we have quite a few really horrible directors, but somewhere in the middle is the good directors. But what we have far too few of in general is truly great directors. And the reason why that's so important, because as a great director, driving a company forward, helping and supporting the management and the CEO to take the strategy forward and design the strategy and really make sure that that business is developing and growing to its full potential. We have a fundamental need, particularly in South Africa, but across Africa, to grow our businesses because they change lives, because they drive communities into a better space. They've got more money in their pockets. They're growing the economy because of the employees coming from those communities that have benefited from working for HR organizations. So if we do a good job of growing our businesses, we can employ more people. We can change lives by having a massive economic impact through that multiplier effect. And if we do the right thing, we can also have an impact on the environment and all of the other stakeholders that we engage with. So for me, it's a really fundamental thing that if we get this directorship thing right, we can really make a difference. So a little bit about you. I'm just going to launch the poll. Sorry, so don't worry, I've got it in front of me. I just wanted to find out really in the room, are you a shareholder, director, and a manager? In other words, you have all 3 hats. Are you an executive director only? Are you a non-executive director as well or only? Or are you just, are you not just, but are you an inspiring non-exec director? This is something you're looking to do in the future. Great, we've got a bit of a spread, good, awesome. So we've got more than one of each, fantastic. So I'll be trying to talk about the difference between the shareholder, director, and manager hats in a very high level, and then also digging into what the difference in style of leadership is, particularly between being a manager and being a director. And this topic has come up quite a lot in the last 2 board meetings I've been in, where we've got relatively new executive directors coming onto a board, and they just haven't got the experience or the understanding of what the difference is between the role of being a director and being a manager. So great, I'm just going to close the poll. Thank you very much. So what I also would like you to do is to write down what is your what next question. So where are you stuck? And then we can cover those questions off at the end of this particular section and put it in the, please put it in the Q&A. And then, leading your business into the new normal or directorship in general. So what is it? Is it a business question? Is it a directorship question? What it is? But write it down and then we can address it in the Q&A at the end. So now more than ever, we need to be leaders in our businesses, and I've put that in inverted commas for a reason, rather than managers, and that requires us to move into the directorship space and work on the business, not in the business. And now more than ever, we need to be looking at how we work on the business, not in the business. And it's really difficult because the resource is limited. We want to cut costs. We're reducing our operational capacity to some extent, which means we get sucked into it. But more than ever, we need to try and find time to think about how we work on the business. And that's really the fundamental role and responsibility of when we're wearing our director hat. And the reason why I've put the own in inverted commas is because we can't own a business. So it's just something to bear in mind. It's the language we use. It's the common way we speak about it's my business. But the problem with language is it drives behavior. So if we, in our minds, think we own the business, we tend to treat the assets of the business differently. We tend to approach doing whatever's in the best interest of the business differently if we think of it as being our possession, our asset. It's unfortunately, it's not. A business is a juristic person, and you can't own a juristic person just like you can't own a human being. So we'll get into that in a second. So there are fundamentally two different types of business. And this is why thinking about the leadership role and moving into the directorship space, it's really important to understand where you're starting from. So a craft is very much about the founder, about the master craftsman or master craftswoman. And it's about the skill and ability of that individual or that individual founding group. Very typically, like a doctor's surgery or a lawyer's practice or a dentist practice or any of those kind of things based on the professional skill and ability of one or more individuals. And then you build a team of supporters, helpers, trainees, other more junior practitioners to support that leader. And typically those businesses work really effectively with between sort of 5 and 10 employees. The problem or the difference between a craft and enterprise is fundamentally that the craft is reliant on that master craftsman. So if you take that person out of the business, there is very little left. It doesn't have a value in and of itself. Whereas an enterprise is built around the concept of it being independent of the founder as much as possible. In other words, it's based on a team, and it has a value in and of itself, because if you remove individuals, then it should be able to keep going. It's about a system. It's about an engine. It's about a way of methodology of delivering something that's not, as I said, as reliant on the individuals as much as a craft is. So if you are leading a craft, it's about how do you maximize the number of hours that you're productive, maximize the pay per hour that you're earning, and then take that money and move it into assets that are outside your business. And typically the best way of setting those up is to just set it up as a sole proprietor, because at the end of the day, you are the shareholder director manager and you're making all the decisions, and fundamentally there isn't any difference between those roles. So you may as well just set it up as a sole proprietor. Meanwhile, as an enterprise, we want to be moving deliberately into the space, even if it's just still 1 or 2 employees. We want to have the mindset of the way I construct this business is around a team. And the earlier you make that shift, the easier it is to build out an organization that has sustainability and resilience. So an enterprise comes from the word entrepreneur, comes from the word entreprendre, which is a French word, which means to undertake, to make a promise. So the entrepreneur comes up with the promise, develops the promise, devises the promise, tests it in the market to see if it's got any value. But then the enterprise carries that promise forward and delivers on the promise. So if you've constructed the enterprise effectively and you've transferred that knowledge and understanding, the values, as much of the skills as possible that are needed for the enterprise to deliver on that promise, then the entrepreneur now has the opportunity to move on and develop the next promise and the next one. And that's really how an entrepreneur derives best value, because the value is in the asset of the business. The value is not in the salary. And a craft tends to be more like, I own a job because I own a salary. An enterprise is much more about, I get paid a salary, but I own the asset. I own shares in the asset, sorry. So I'm getting the value of the asset growth, not just a salary increase. So once we've made the decision, I'm either going to build a business like a craft, which doesn't need a different type of leadership because the director concept doesn't really exist in that context. I'm going to build an enterprise. Now I need to fundamentally start to understand what the difference of the components of a PTY Limited, for example, are, which is I have shareholders, at least one in a PTI. I have directors, or at least one. and I have at least a manager, otherwise I have no operations. But they are separate and different. So an example of a promise that you might want to use for business, things like Disney creating magic. So the idea of this, the concept behind it is that, Johnny, I'll just get on to you now in a second. So the concept is that if I break that promise, not only does the market know, but we should guess and understand it in the organization as well. So we're always living to deliver that promise. And everything we do, we're measuring against whether it's part of the delivery of that promise or not. So as a leader, we need to move to the phase where we are thinking much bigger than the organization. We want to develop a promise that is bigger than the organization is right now, because that gives us capacity to grow. And our responsibility as a director is to own that strategy and take that strategy forward and make sure the organization delivers on that promise and on that strategy. So there was a hand up. Sally, was there a hand up? I saw something flash on my screen. Has the question been answered? I can't see anything in the Q&A box. Did you have a question? Something in the chat box, or you want to put it in the Q&A? And I'll get to it in a second. So what this looks like is shareholders, directors, and managers are joined, but there is a definite gap between shareholding and managing. Shareholders should not be involved in operations at all. They should only be involved in operations via the board, via directors. So if you're holding all three of those hats, you need to be really, really clear when you are thinking and doing, wearing each. So there's a separation, needs to be, for an organization to be effective, between the shareholder and the manager, because the shareholder invests for return. It's a selfish relationship. I've put money in, I've put time in, I now own the rights via shares to return on investment. I want to receive an investment. I want to see my capital grow, or I want to receive a dividend. The director champions the promise, so they're taking the strategy forward, they're delivering, making sure the organization delivers on the promise, so that the management team is bringing that promise to life. So they are very separate and have different responsibilities, which we go into in a lot more detail in our high performance board workshop. There's one coming up in July, and also in the applied directorship program, which I'll be talking about a little bit at the end of this, in this short webinar. So what is the role of the director? So as a director, your leadership space is very much now around strategy, leading the organization as a role model, but not by being in the operations, and governance, which is about the policies and procedures. So how do we build this engine so that it can run on its own, because we have described this is the way we do things around here with policies and procedures. And we have a clear strategy which has been communicated to the organization. And often as entrepreneurs, we don't really focus on the policies and procedures and the strategy because it's in our head. But to move to the space of running an enterprise, move to the space of building a bigger business, you need to start delegating that and handing that down. And the way you delegate most effectively is by clearly documenting things in policies and procedures, and clearly documenting the strategy so that everybody has an idea where we're going. They don't need to keep asking you as a leader all the time because it's written down. So what is a board? So we've got, now you've got starting to understand, okay, well, this director thing, it's different from being a manager. Now, what about this board thing? What's that for? So it's based on director or directors. Ideally, you want to have more than one director. There's the team element, which is not only the team in the boardroom, the team of directors, but it's the way the rest of the organization supports that group. So how is information coming up to the board? How is information being disseminated down from the board? Is that effective? Have we trained our team? So for a larger organization, doing director training for management is actually quite important, because if they don't understand the role of the board, then they're not going to struggle to communicate with the board, and they're going to struggle to also know what to do with the information that's coming out of the board. So it's almost as important to train the executives in the team as it is to train the people that are in the room. And the methodology is that the piece that holds it all together. So if you don't have a methodology that you're applying in your process, It's just like any other part of your business. If there isn't a way of doing things, or if there isn't a standard operating procedure that you use, then things tend to fall apart. Things take longer than they need to. They're not as effective as they could be. So that methodology piece is just as important in the relationship between the directors and the rest of the organization, and also how the shareholders communicate backwards and forwards between the directors too. And the fundamental piece, which is what scares most entrepreneurs the most that I talk to, is this piece about a board holds the company accountable to a performance standard higher than it's ever been held before. As an entrepreneur, as a founder, I started a business typically because I didn't want to be told what to do. But unfortunately, as a business grows, there needs to be some layer somewhere to hold you accountable. Otherwise, it's really difficult to hold yourself accountable as decisions become more complex, as there's more money involved in the decisions. The mistakes get bigger. We don't have all the answers anymore. We need help. We need oversight. We need a team to support us. And that's what the board's for. The what next is I'm feeling lonely. I'm on my own. I'm struggling to make big decisions because they're important decisions and they have an impact on people's lives, which you talked about earlier. How do I get that space, that safe space to bounce ideas off, to get other opinions, to get other perspectives, to thrash through things? I can't do it with my family. I can't do it with my friends. That's what the board's for, because you're all in it together. The reason for being of a team of directors is, as I said, to do what is in the best interest of the business, so that we have an opportunity to step out of our own fears and discomforts and start thinking about what's in the best interest of the larger organization. So it's about this leverage. If we want to really improve company performance, we need that methodology thing to lever on. It's got to be strong. It's got to be solid. It's got to be consistent. Otherwise, there's no lever. We need the structure of the board to act as that pivot. The stronger the board is, the more you can apply pressure on it, and the more likely it is to shift that weight of company performance. And obviously, you need strong directors on the end. It's not just one person. It's a strong team that work together to be most effective. So I hope that diagram, if nothing else, helps you understand that this is the picture of what next in any small to medium enterprise. You need to be thinking about how you're going to build this out going forward, because it's not a quick fix. It's something that takes time, it takes planning, and it's something you develop into. But it makes a massive difference if you do it right. It really makes a huge difference. And I've been working with clients where their profit numbers have gone up by factors of 6, 7, 8, 9 over the last year, through one of the worst years ever, not just because they're in the right product and service, but because they started to build and understand these foundation blocks and started to be able to lever them, because then we could make decisions more quickly that were really strong and powerful, and difficult decisions more quickly, because we had a team that the top executives could rely on. So are you ready? One step you could take along the route to make it a little bit easier would be to go for an advisory board concept rather than a legal board. So find some people as mentors and bring them into a room once a month, once a quarter, however much you can do it. The difficulty of advisory boards, if they do anything other than give advice, then there starts potential being legal problems. So you want the advisory board to answer a question or give their perspectives on a question that you've asked them, and then you take those answers and filter it and deliberate it yourself. If you use that body to come to the answer, then they are now starting to be seen as proper directors, because they're making strategic decisions. So it's a very fine balance, but it can be massively powerful to bring those voices into discussion. And as I said, create a safe space. So EO forums, YPO forums, those kind of organizations are a great way of having some concept of an advisory board. This is my problem. Let's talk about it. Tell me stories about how you've been in a similar situation that I can then use and bring into my own thinking. So the model we use, and this is your new playing field. If you're going to take the business to the next level, as a director, you need to be thinking about these main areas: strategy, direction. What is the organizational culture? Is it related to the strategy and direction? Is it taking the business forward? Have we got the effective leadership across the team? not only in the boardroom. Am I the right person to do this job? I de facto became the CEO MD, but actually, is it what I want to do? Is it what I'm good at? You need to have those conversations. Then stakeholder engagement. So who are all of our stakeholders? Have we actually written down a list? Have we worked out how often we need to engage with them? Who is responsible for each? Those kind of things. It's an important part of your strategic conversation you should be having within the organization, at least once a year. Then as shareholder returns, as a board, we take that document from the shareholders, the statement of intent, which defines what kind of returns they're expecting, what kind of capital growth, if that's important, they're expecting, any other things that they're expecting in terms of the performance of the business that they will be measuring the board against. Make sure that's in writing. Make sure it's been thought through carefully. Then with a director hat on, which is why it makes it much easier if you've got more than one director, is to think and interrogate that document and go back to shareholders and say, look, this is not very clear. We're not quite sure how to deliver on this, or we think this is completely unfeasible, because that becomes your scorecard. The idea being separating those duties, we need to have a clear mandate from shareholders. And then as a board, we can focus on delivering returns against the mandate they've defined. But it's a strategic conversation. It's not, and it needs to happen. It needs to happen at least once a year. Then risk management compliance, this is typically what most people think of when it's governance, but it's just a piece of the puzzle. Financial results, thinking about from a strategic perspective. Have we got too much debt, too little debt? Have we structured our balance sheet correctly? What's our revenue and income statement telling us? Are our costs too high? Have we got room to invest? Do we need to invest to grow our top line, et cetera, et cetera? So it's looking at those numbers, those income statement, balance sheet from a very much more strategic, looking forward perspective, rather than just treating them as looking back information. It's the history that then helps you define what happens in the future. And then evaluation improvement is something you need to be doing continuously, but at least once a year. Have we done an evaluation of the performance of the board? Have we done an evaluation of the computer systems we're using, the technology we're using, et cetera, or other processes? So all of those pieces are discussed in detail on the Applied Directorship Program. And this is the space, as I said before, as a director, we need to be operating. So have you decided your strategy? Have you understood your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities and threats? And then one of the big ones, which we just talked about earlier, was the big trend coming right now is this fourth industrial revolution. And digging into this was fascinating. So I'll just have a couple of slides on what I've uncovered, just in case you haven't had the opportunity to read up much on it. So a bit of history lesson, 4 types of industrial revolution. So in 1765, coal started to become prevalent, and it gave people the opportunity to build steam engines and other ways of using heat to generate industry. So it went from very manual and a bit of mechanization to much more mechanized, and you started to build those big factories and industries powered by coal. Then in 1870, gas and oil and electricity came into the fore, which meant you could have smaller engines, combustion engines, cars started to become possible, steel production started to become possible, and chemicals, etc. So it's taking industry to the next level. What's really scary is those first 2 phases were massive pollutants, as we're now starting to realize. So thankfully, we're now into the renewable energy phase, but in between was nuclear and electronics, which started computers. And now we're in the space where we have the opportunity to produce energy from different sources. We have this global concept of the internet, and we can now start to talk to anything and everything, which has meant that it's really starting to blur the boundaries now. So where we need to be aware as a business is that it's not business usual anymore in a lot of industries, because we're changing and blurring the lines between physical and digital and biological. So it's these fusion of advances with artificial intelligence, not necessarily replacing humans, but doing the tasks that are something that is repetitive and something that we can hand over to another robot, for want of a better word, or computer to do that work. So that as humans, we should be focusing much more on thinking, much more on creating the new way of doing stuff, or just doing a better thing, rather than spending all day, every day, doing something that's repetitive and could easily be automated. So now you've got everything connected, the Internet of Things. So what's impacts that going to have on our businesses? 3D printing. I'll just go into a few examples that are really scary, how far this has come in such a short space of time. Genetic engineering, quantum computing, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these things will have some impact on all of our businesses. So we need to be aware, we need to let go of preconceived ideas. We need to be much more agile, and we need to be much more, the sources of information we're bringing into our organization need to be a lot more diverse. So how do we prosper? So the World Economic Forum article I've read last week says, basically, how do we prosper? We need to be agile. It's all about agility now. So we need to make sure that we're much more flexible in our thinking. We're not much more flexible, and we've been forced into it during these COVID lockdowns, much more flexible about the way we treat employees and the way we engage with employees, working from home, with part-time, full-time. You know, there's a lot more flexibility now than there was before, and we're starting to realize that it is actually possible for people to be productive without being locked in effectively the modern version of a factory. So it's that agility is absolutely key. And what's happening? So this is the reality on the ground. We've got the first 3D printed habitable house. Someone moved into this house in April this year. It took 100 or equivalent of 120 hours to build. And the reason why they selected this rather weird shape, which is supposed to be based on the shape of a boulder, is because using conventional building techniques, this is actually quite difficult. Whereas using 3D printing techniques is actually relatively easy. So it's 120 hours. So if they ran that machine 24/7, that's what, 5 days? This changes the game. No, it's not going to replace everything, but we need to start thinking about, if we're in some kind of construction, if we're in some kind of manufacturing, how is this going to change what we do? And cool cars, we never really thought that they would end up being 3D printed, but this is a design that is already being 3D printed using carbon fiber tubes and printed aluminium and all kinds of other stuff. We're taking design to a different level because a lot of this stuff is quite difficult to make using bending and forming technologies, whereas printing technologies mean that we can build all kinds of weird and wonderful honeycombs and stuff, which are really, really strong and really, really light, but almost impossible to build in any other way. So where else in any kind of manufacturing can we do this stuff? So we're now in, I found a website that had an example of a 25-foot boat that had been 3D printed. Mercedes is already printing parts to their normal approved specifications using 3D printing processes. There are guns that are available 3D printed. There are musical instruments. Someone made a violin and someone else made a guitar, I think, out of 3D printing. Someone built a kayak at home in 42 days on a little home printer, printing at home. Yes, it's in pieces and you compile it, but it floats, it works. And he printed it in his house without having to go anywhere and didn't have to go to the shop and buy a kayak. Printed candy, printed food. There's a machine that'll print a pizza for you from the base up, base, toppings, everything. You can get printed football boots, the most amazing designs, super lightweight, all these honeycomb technology. You can get printed clothing. We're now in prosthetics, the stunning prosthetics that have been 3D printed, that just giving completely different opportunities to people who have lost limbs, animals, as well as humans. Bioprinting replacement body parts. I didn't want to show the picture because I found it grossed me out a bit, but you can now print nose skin in the form of a new nose, so someone can have that sewn onto their face and reconstructive surgery. So there was a picture of a 3D printed nose and a 3D printed ear. And if you're not convinced that you need to rethink some of the aspects of your business, then there's one advert I saw was, there's a startup that's been set up that will allow you to print your own car design. They will help you with the construction of the body tubing and framework and whatever, but they will allow you to use their software with various limitations, obviously, to design your own car and then print your own car. There are so many places in all kinds of manufacturing processes where we move rapidly down to making one. and I choose what my one looks like. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's definitely already moving into that space, as I said, with 3D printed personalized football boots, for example, and now potentially 3D printed personalized cars. So what's the potential? What do you need to do? What is the way forward? So I just suddenly thought of this Johari window as a way of thinking about this, because we need to understand our blind spots. So those, a lot in industry generally, those are known to someone else. We can find out on the internet, but we need to start doing that. We need to start opening ourselves up to stopping doing things that we've typically done before and starting doing new things and uncovering what we don't know. So a lot of the things that we're doing in training is helping people uncover what they don't know about being a director, what they don't know about the responsibilities of that role. Because unless someone else opens that window for you and shows you what outside, it's often really difficult to get it, really difficult to understand what we're missing and what we're not aware of. So be vulnerable, get help, talk to other people, share your thoughts and feelings with others. So that's a large part of some of these membership groups, where they give a safe space to be able to do that. So if you don't have a safe space, then you need to start thinking about how you build it. And it could be with other business people you know. It could even be something you start as a family. But it's understanding that you need to absorb other people's perspectives, other people's points of view. Find people who are digital natives. So we're talking a lot now at board level about how do we bring in digital natives? In other words, people that were born with technology. They have absolutely no fear of it, and they intuitively understand how it works because it's all they've known. So when our kids used to, for example, my wife gets stuck with a cell phone, hands it over to her son, please, can you sort this out? No, there you go, Mom. We need to bring that kind of level of thinking and ability to cope with new circumstances into our businesses. And that will probably mean we need to bring younger people onto boards that we never thought we would, because we just don't, as 50-somethings, we just don't have that foundation. We just don't understand this new technology at the same level as younger generations do. So as I said, test your limits, get out of your comfort zone, do new things, stretch what it is you thought you knew, and test it, and then find completely different ways of doing something. We have to let go of a lot of our old habits. We have to unlearn things which are no longer useful. So just to recap, what it takes leaders, a director rather, it's strategic focus. And it's a focus on the best interest of the company, which is sometimes quite difficult, because particularly as a founder, we tend to bounce around with, well, with my shareholder hat on, I need to think about whether I need to put money in the company this month to pay salaries. But that's a shareholder conversation. As a director, we need to think about, well, where's the strategy going? We need to think about, well, what else could we use in terms of financing? Have we explored all those opportunities? And then as a last rule, we'll approach shareholders and ask them if they can help out. Or we need to cut costs so that we don't have to ask shareholders. But if it's our business and it feels like family, we tend to wade in very quickly without necessarily going through that thinking process. And we tend to just put the cash in just to sort out the problem. Structuring an effective board is very much about variety now. We have to bring, and we talked about diversity, and it's really, really critical to start bringing women into your board or into your executive team if you've only got men, because they see the world from a different perspective. And you bring both perspectives together, you make better decisions. You see risks that one or the other party couldn't. You see opportunities that one or the other party couldn't. And together it makes a much more powerful team. We need to bring in diversity from ways of thinking. So we talked about digital natives, from life experience. So what is the experience our client base is going through? Have we got someone in our executive team who understands that at a deep level? Or are we using someone's life experience that's up here to try and solve a problem of someone's life experience that's very much different? So it's important that diversity is not just a race or sex thing. It's about anything and everything that could be different, because the variety of things that are coming at us has grown enormously. So we need to make sure our organization has that variety built into it. And if not, then it needs to have a system that controls the variability as much as possible, so that you've got something left in the middle, which is a little bit easier to control. But it's absolutely critical that we think about, where have we got too many of the same ways of thinking, too much of the same way of doing something? We need to start building in variety, and we need to start building in agility. And 4 hours about, as I said, digital natives, through understanding of the role, or thorough understanding of the role as a director. So have I done director training? Do I really understand what it's all about? How do I add value in the boardroom? How do I make sure I interrogate the executive team? Not so much to show them up or to make them feel bad, but more about understanding what the difficulties are, understanding what the challenges are, so I can help and support them to move forward. And the last piece on the flyer was what I need to have in place before bringing investors. So if you are growing and you are in a position where you need to get investment in, it's even more important that you have a sound structure in the business, that there's good transparency in your financials, so that someone coming in knows what they're buying into. They don't have to unpack a whole bunch of stuff that's been hidden somewhere, and then as soon as they find that thing that was a little bit obscure, and well, what else have you not told me about? And but hold on, why are you paying these people so much? Or why are you paying these people so little? Is that to boost your profits, et cetera, et cetera? So it's about having proper structures, clarity within the organization between the different hats of shareholder, director, manager, that you can demonstrate because you are having different meetings at the different levels, and transparency within the way the processes work, the way the financials are set up, so that someone coming in can come do their due diligence and it makes sense, and they can make a decision quickly and move forward. So I hope that's helpful. We'll take questions now on that section, and then if anybody's more interested in finding out a bit more about the Applied Directorship Program, then please stay on the call and I'll go through that in a little bit more detail. Any questions in the Q&A box? Oops. Anything, questions in the chat box? So a common question is that I've only got 2 or 3 staff. Why do I need a board? And that's really absolutely valid. You don't need a board, but you need to start thinking about what that enterprise concept looks like. So I've been doing some webinars before lockdown, less since lockdown, to startups to try and help and understand that fundamental difference between craft and enterprise, because then you can make a decision as early as possible which direction you're going. And the key thing when you're going in an enterprise direction is, who do you employ next? If you're building a team, you're going to want to employ someone who knows more than you do about a particular area of business. That's the next most important thing. If you're building a craft, you tend to employ someone who knows less than you, because you want to build them up and they support you. If they eventually leave and move on, they tend to move on to become a competitor. So there's a tendency to want to employ someone who knows less than you, and you may or may not train them up to the same level. But it's a fundamental difference in approach as you build the team. So craft very much gets built with layers below that know less and less about what the master craftsman woman knows. Whereas in enterprise, you want to be building layers and layers of teams of people that specialize in particular functions, then frees you up to raise up above the organization, was float up above the organization, and now start to think about the next strategic initiative, about the next S-curve as the organization goes forward. Cool, no questions. So if anyone would like to stay, I'm just going to move on to some of the other stuff. So the idea of the Applied Directorship Program, as I said, is to really take the high performance director concept to the next level. So I'm just trying to get rid of this Q&A box so I can see my screen. And what we want to do as a director, and a particularly difficult thing often, is to have a tough conversation in the room. So if you have done some training, you have confidence in what the role and responsibilities look like of a director, you have confidence in your understanding of what governance is all about, then it's much, much easier to have those tough conversations in the room than if there's other people in the room who you think know more than you, and you just sort of sit back and, well, I'll let so-and-so bring that up, because I just don't feel confident in having a yes or no kind of stance. So that's what we want to try and do as part of the training, is to make sure that we've developed your leadership skill and your governance understanding, because it's a continuous work in progress. This never stops. You got to keep reading, you got to keep learning, you got to keep doing the courses to keep up and build on what you've done before, so that you can be more and more valuable in that role, more and more effective in that role. Cerdo's been around for more than 12 years now, and we've really specialized on training directors, appointing non-exec directors. So it's a recruitment element, but we don't typically appoint executives. We focus on non-exec directors. And then the guide piece is about supporting the board on an ongoing journey as it becomes more and more effective. So helping to implement the methodology, helping with doing the COSEC stuff like drawing up the board papers, but talking to the methodology the whole time. How do we construct the agenda in a particular way that's going to be effective? How do we construct the decision, discussion, etc. papers so that they're going to be effective and we can make decisions? And then we also now use a tool called the contribution compass as part of profiling the boards and profiling other teams to help us understand where the shortcomings might be of that team and how to balance it out by bringing other people in. And now we're moving into electronic space. We've got a partnership with Onboard that provides electronic board papers. So very exciting about taking that forward and moving away from the typical PDFs or just a big fat wad of paper. So Cerdo directorship program all online now. We moved online at the beginning of lockdown in 2020, and the feedback has been fantastic because each group ends up with a much more diverse group of people from across the continent, instead of just being from Cape Town or Johannesburg or Nairobi or Accra in Ghana, where our other offices are. So now we've got people on the courses from Nigeria and Tanzania and Rwanda and all over that can then engage and interact and share ideas and experiences with the group, which gives them a much broader exposure to what's happening in other countries around the continent. And you don't learn by doing a degree. So the idea of the program is that it's as practical as possible, but there is a strong element of theory as well. So it includes a lot of online material, videos. There's a book, Traversing the Avalanche, which you read throughout the program. And we do the contribution compass profiling, so you've got a better understanding of your own profile. And we use that as part of the board process. So you've got the practical element of having simulated board meetings, running a simulated company through an American university software package. You have the theory element, where we have an online platform that gives you access to all of those materials. And then there's lots of self-reflection exercises as well to make sure that we're starting to practice the habits that we should be using going forward as a director. This is not about passing an exam. It's about learning a completely new habit and a completely new skill set that you then grow and develop and refine as you move forward and you sit on either boards as an executive or boards as a non-executive going forward. So it's a lot more than just reading a book. It's much more about actually having practical time in the boardroom. And it requires time. So we also worked on the principle that if someone can do this course, then they will be able to find the time in the diary to serve effectively and add value on a board that meets monthly, for example. We didn't want to make the course any longer than it is. It's already 11 months, but we couldn't make it any shorter than it is either, because otherwise the workload just became too much and people started to fall off the wagon because they couldn't keep up. So it's very much based on, you have a monthly board meeting, which is the only fixed time in your diary. Everything else is the time that you need to catch up with the videos and everything else that's online, as I've mentioned, and preparation for the board meetings in your own time, just as if you were on the board of a company where you have a defined board meeting time and you need to fit in all the other preparation around it. So it means a commitment to your own development, and it requires time and energy, and we'll hopefully give you the guidance to make sure that that time's well spent. So a quick overview of the program. First thing to clear off, it's not an MBA, not designed to be an MBA. It follows a similar structure to MBA, but the idea is that a management Bachelor of what's that? Masters of Business Administration. Let's get it right. I even did the thing. Master of Business Administration is about management, whereas this is about directorship. So the focus 100% is on the skills and knowledge you need to have as a director. So if you've done an MBA before, it's useful and it's good background, but you're not going to learn the same things on the applied directorship program. And it also means you don't have to have done an MBA in order to move into applied directorship program. They are distinctly separate and different. And it's not a 1 week intense course. It's an extended program because we need this, the learning needs to settle. And then you need to practice it again and let that settle and practice it again and let that settle and practice it again. So after you've done the 8 board meetings during the course, now you're starting to get into a rhythm. Now you're starting to really understand the value of what you've been taught because you've been able to apply it. And it's theory, it's not theory versus simulation, it's both. So we give you the theory and we do the simulation because we found that's by far the best way to learn. So as I said, the program is broken down into 11 modules. The 11th module is not really a class. It's not designed for sharing new information. It's an opportunity for everybody at the end of the course to reflect on what they've learned along the way, to review the simulated companies and why one company did better than the others, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an opportunity to share and reflect on the course. And that was added after we'd run the course a couple of times because people said they needed that extra time to really let all this stuff come together. First module is framework, foundational. So we've touched on some of the stuff today, going through the 3 hats of shareholder, director, manager, what are director's duties, et cetera, et cetera. Second one, we start to think about, well, how do you build a board? What are the things you need to consider when you're building a board? That's where the contribution compass profiling tool comes in, because we want to look at your profile and how you act in the boardroom and how you're going to act in a critical situation. Then you start to move into the simulated board meetings from module 3 onwards, and we go around that strategy governance compass that we looked at earlier. So it's strategy, then it's the organizational culture, then it's effective leadership. And each board meeting has example board papers related to that topic. And when you go online and look at the education platform, the subject matter for that month is related to that topic. So there'll be lots of videos and reading about strategy, and then move on a month, and then you will open up the next modules, reading and videos about organizational culture, etc., as you go through the program. And the second half, now we move into stakeholder engagement, shareholder expectations. There's really interesting videos and readings about dividend policies and how powerful a dividend policy can be in terms of attracting or repelling particular types of shareholders as a business gets to the point where it's bringing in more shareholders, because the dividend policy drives behavior in shareholders, and that's something we don't normally consider. Risk appetite, so how the craft and science of measuring risk. We'll go into that a fair amount of detail. And then budget setting, why it's really important to have a budget. So many businesses I come across don't have a budget because they think of it as being like a target. Unfortunately, government has given budgets a bad rap by, if you don't spend your budget, then you lose it. Whereas in an entrepreneurial business, the budget is a best guess of what we think the future is going to look like. In other words, it's our representation of our strategy in numbers. And it's a scorecard. It's a way of going, oh, did we overestimate or did we underestimate? Are our costs going out of whack and our revenues not where it was? We need to adjust something. That's what it's for. And then hopefully you learn from the experience, and then you do a better job of guessing in your next year's budget, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just gives you a forewarning if something is going to go wrong. It's not, oh, well, if it's in the budget, I must spend it. So it's trying to debunk some of those myths, et cetera, and really get to understand why an understanding of financials as a director is so critical. And then the last section is the performance evaluation. You go through a performance evaluation process of your team that you were in your cohort with. That's what the contribution compass looks like. And it's very much about making sure that each seat around the table is adding value. So we don't want lots of people with the same profile around the room, because then at least one of them is redundant because their thinking, their contribution is doubled up. We need to make sure we bring in someone who's bringing in a different perspective. So a board needs to be a complete cross-section of different perspectives, not lots of people like me. And that sits on top of the governance compass. So a catalyst, for example, is good at understanding the strategy and direction. The custodian is going to be much more able to understand, well, what's the shareholders' perspective, and how do we manage our assets and resources to make sure that we fulfill their expectations. And you will see as you go through the board meetings, which profiles show up when we're talking about the particular subjects and which profiles tend to be a bit quieter. And it's fascinating as part of the process to see that shift as you go around the wheel. So 11-month program in total, maximum 20 in a cohort. It's broken down into 3 or 4 boards in the room, and each board runs their own separate company, but in the same system, so same market, so similar product. You have 8 simulated board meetings, so you get to try this thing over and over and over and build that muscle, build that habit. 4 hours per month in the session. So there's either a morning cohort or an afternoon cohort to help cope with time zones and people's diaries. 3 to 4 hours per week is what we recommend in terms of preparation and online learning. If you can find that sort of number of hours a week, maybe it's half a day on Sunday or however you do it whilst you're driving, whilst you're traveling, it means you will be on top of it. If you get too few hours, then it ends up being a bit of a rush at the end of each month. Network of like-minded individuals. Everybody in the room either is a director or will soon be. So you've got a lot of common ground, a lot of experience that you can share. And at the end, you get a certificate of attendance and a certificate of competence, which is becoming more and more recognized in industries around the world, actually, because we have such a close relationship with EO and YPO, that they've got members all over the world, and we've done training programs with them. We've got members of our team that are part of those organizations, etc. So a lot of businesses are now starting to hear about Cerdo and hear about this program and recognize that it's actually valuable and important. So I'm just going to skip to, yes, an important point. By doing the program, yes, you can apply to join our director network, but it's not a guarantee we'll be able to find an appointment for you. That's just like starting a new job. It's just like starting a new career. A lot of it depends on your background, your experience, where you stay, where the opportunities might be, all of those kind of things. We can open up the opportunities for you, but we can't guarantee that you'll actually be placed. But I can guarantee that you will learn a significant amount in this program that you probably wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. So no time for this, no time for the boardroom. It's also important to understand if you're really struggling to find the time to do the program, then it's going to be really tough to be an effective non-executive director on a board with someone else, because it does take an awful lot of time and effort. So we invite you to join the program, challenge your thinking, improve your prospects as a non-executive and an executive director, and begin that journey as a high-performance director. So as Buffett says, the best investment is in yourself. So where are you spending money on your personal development? So the numbers, this is the international price or fee investment, the regional centers. So if you have been put on this webinar by someone from Kenya or from Ghana or from South Africa, please speak to that individual, because there may be different prices in the different regions. But this is the international price. And yeah, the notes, sorry, no, it's not the 15th of June, it's the 13th of July, my mistake. Also, anybody who was on the call today, we've got your details. So if you sign up before the end of the month, which is before close of business tomorrow, we're just offering a $250 voucher that you can then spend on someone else to attend one of our programs. You can put it against your deposit. It's up to you how you use it. But as I said, if there's a massive regional offer, or because you're a part of another organization, we'd have to consider whether we can give you both. The link is there, ADP online. I think, yep, so see that Sally's put it into the chat box as well. Either type this in or click on the link that he's given you. That's where the application form is. And it's very much an application form. So we need a bit of detail about your background, and then we'll just to confirm that you've got, you're the right person to put in the room. It's not to say we're deliberately trying to stop people entering, but sometimes we've had people who just don't have quite enough experience. So don't be afraid that you of not applying. We'll let you know if we think it's not appropriate for you. But in most cases, if you've got some directorship experience, or you've got the position where you are about to be in that position where you can get directorship experience, then you'll be absolutely fine. So this is what the form looks like. If it does a page that comes up and doesn't look similar to this, then you've gone to the wrong place. And please let us know and we'll send you another link. So it's preparation at base camp. You're at base camp. This is the beginning of your directorship journey. If you really want to climb this mountain of becoming an effective director, if you really want to take your organization to the next level, then you have to do the work. And you can't do that whilst you're climbing. It's really difficult. So let's do it before we start the next push. And then we're ready. Then we're equipped. And we're more likely to actually achieve and get to the summit. If you have no other personal contacts of salespeople in your region, then please, by all means, send me an email. I know that after the session, the individuals whose links you clicked on will be getting in touch with you, providing a copy of an ebook, which I also see is in the chat box if you want to download it now, and then just following up to see if there's anything else you particularly want. So in closing, I'll go through questions, but whilst we're going through questions, if you can just put that poll up, please, Sally, for next steps. And really, it's no commitment. I just want to find out a little bit more about, would you like to spend half an hour consulting with me or one of our other senior partners just to talk about where you're at and think about the question of what next? Happy to do that. Would you be interested in a book? Would you be interested in coming to another webinar, et cetera, et cetera? So let us know, and then we can make that happen. The two books I was mentioning are Traversing the Avalanche and Laws of Extreme Business Success. Laws of Extreme Business Success is a really good foundational book. It was the first book Carl wrote, and it was trying to explain to his family the difference between shareholder directors and managers, the complications of running business around the dinner table as a family, and the shareholder hat getting involved in the conversation about how to run the operations, as typically happens, etc. Traversing the Avalanche is much more of a dedicated book to the craft of directorship. So the first half, and the foreword was written by Professor Mervyn King. Another reason why we know you can't own a business, because we used that wording in the first draft and he told us, nope, you need to replace that with shareholder manager. Okay, got to go back and rewrite whole sections of the book. But that's the common misunderstanding, is we don't own a business. We own shares, but they are just a basket of rights. That's all they are. And the second half of that book goes through the governance compass, and there's a chapter on each of those strategic subjects. So that's the basis of this program. Any questions? Anything else? And yes, the 13th of July is when our next cohort starts. That's 2 weeks' time. Any other questions? Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. By all means, email us, follow up on the emails when they get sent after this webinar closes. And yeah, happy to help in any way we can. Obviously, no commitment. I just personally, my mission is to help businesses grow, be more sustainable, employ more people. And if I can do anything to help your business, then absolutely, I'll make every effort to do so. So if there's no other questions, thank you very much for your time. Sorry, I've running a couple of minutes over. Really appreciate you joining me on this call, and hopefully we'll see you at future events. Thanks very much indeed.